we're now looking out into the world. And we've got representatives here from Canada, from Germany, and from, I would say, well, Israel, but also international. So let me introduce the three of them. So next to me, we've got Silvia Perel-Levin. He's not only a consultant on human rights of older persons, so I've known Silvia for a while now and worked together. Silvia is a real force of nature when it comes to human rights generally, but specifically of human rights of older people. She's a force of nature in the United Nations, tirelessly at Geneva or New York, wherever we're needed. She is advocating there for a new convention on the rights of older people. And it's looking more and more likely that we will have such an instrument in hopefully very soon. And if it happens, then Silvia will have been one of the advocates who has really made that possible. So I'm really pleased to have Silvia here, who will also talk to us a little bit about her international work and work with the WHO and so on. Then we have this Dr. Christoph Ellssel from the Catholic University of Applied Sciences in Munich, and also a long-term collaborator on social care research. Christopher leads the Center of Future Aging. And the University of Applied Sciences in Munich is a really, truly special place when it comes to research into social care, where a lot of care workers also come and get university-level training. And it's really special to have you here too. Thank you so much for traveling from Germany to be with us. And then we've got our very own Professor Samir Sinha, who's one of the visiting fellows at the Institute for Ethics in AI this year, and a very special colleague, but is a professor of family and community medicine, a geriatrician from the University of Toronto, and the director of health policy research of the National Institute on Aging. And again, it's really great to have you here. And I think we've got a lot to look forward to work together in the future. Now, how this panel is going to work is that three of them will start with Silvia, will give a little reflection on what they have heard, what they're taking away from all of the work that we've been doing here in the UK, and to also give us a short input from their countries or their context and how they see this topic being treated, tackled, spoken about in a more international space. So Silvia, I'll hand over to you now for the next round. Well, I'll stop you after 10 minutes, but please, over to you.
I feel humbled, and you are very generous. I wouldn't take that credit for the advocacy, because it is global advocacy. Maybe I'm louder than others, but really it's teamwork, and I think that the extent of the impact of the teamwork is what we are seeing now. The Human Rights Council is taking place now in Geneva. This is where I have come from now here, and we are not yet having a convention so soon, but what we are about to have is a resolution establishing a drafting group. And that is a big event. I'm very excited about that is happening. So I do take a little credit, but not all of it. But I'm also very humbled because I'm very impressed for what I've seen. I've been here yesterday, and the level of engagement, the level of the number of committed people across sectors, I think it's impressive. And although I wasn't born here, I'm also British. I'm married to a Brit, and I also did my master's in the UK, in London, in interprofessional practice, in fact. So I do value. I was formed in believing at the importance of on going across professions. If I may, I don't know if anybody from the police is here, which I think. Well, thank you. Because that is, I grew up in a country where I learned to be afraid of the police. And it took that master's in the UK to gain trust again in, family liaison officers and understanding that the police can also do good work. And I believe that we need to involve them more as well when we talk about interprofessional practice and the fact that they are near the people who may be in need. And so I don't want to repeat all the things because I share all your excitement of AI, but I also share the concerns. and the big concerns. And I wanted to. So we talk about human rights. Why I work on human rights? I don't have a legal formation, but my work in human rights really started when I was working in the World Health Organization, WHO, on elder abuse. And I always cite that when we ask professionals, they give you always the classification of the types of abuse. When we used to ask older people what they think, what they thought elder abuse was, and still is the case, they will all say, it's taking away my choice, it's taking away my rights. And that brought my complete change of from really doing the work that we were doing in WHO for older people, in doing it with, and understanding the importance of rights and the importance of the discrimination or the ageism that is real, that we all feel it, and that we need an instrument to work on that. There, my face recognition. But then the issue of human rights. So what are the rights? I mean, we talked a lot about the right to privacy, but I think we can expand the right to privacy, not just to the privacy on data, but also the privacy on our daily lives. I mean, all the people, sometimes they live with cameras in their, we talked about fall preventions, and there are more intrusive than other methods of preventing fall preventions, but also the way of monitoring our daily lives can be extremely intrusive. And the fact that we do have a right to our own privacy, the right to the right to choose where to live, the right to live independently in the community, and the fact that going into a nursing home is most of the time not a real choice and not our choice. That, if the choice is between no care at all or some with care, then it's not a real choice. But we should have the choice to decide where we live, with whom we live. And that also depends on the privacy, because people in long-term care institutions, they don't have any privacy. They don't have the right to choose when to eat, when to go to sleep. So that, I think that we can expand. The non-discrimination, I think that it was really the non-discrimination that we always include age into when we talk about diversity. 2 minutes? Okay, so I go first. Why is it important that we talk, and why I want to bring the international perspective? I can't believe I spoke for 8 minutes already. A lot of what you do, a lot of what we do, it has an impact in what happens in the world. And what happens in the world has an impact in what happens here. First of all, the standards, when we talk about regulating, when we talk about standards, are not only national standards. A lot of the national standards they have to comply with international standards that the UK has signed into, because they ratify international instruments of human rights. So if they ratify, they are bound to respect and not to contradict or not to lower the standards with the national regulations. So it's very important to know what are those international standards, that when you work on them, that should be the minimum standard. You can always increase, but you could never go below. And that is something that the CRPD, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, raised the bar in many, many ways. And this is one of the reasons why many governments are so afraid of a Convention on the Rights of Older People, because, wow, if we need to apply the right to community, the right to legal capacity, the right independence, when we talk about older people, that is a lot of people. And but we talk about the right to education, and a lot was mentioned about training and the retraining. And this retraining, once you are out of the labor market, you are out of any training. So a lot of people that even use, and care workers that maybe professionally on the formal market be a care worker, but we carry on being a caregiver, an informal caregiver, but without access to training. So I just wanted to bring that there is a lot of work being done, both in care, on the right to care, new norms being, new reports, new norms being talking about the rights of care recipients, but also caregivers, both formal and informal, at the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights, at the Human Rights Council, at the UN, with new standards and proposals for reform of the care system. This is work done globally, and you should be part of it. You should be part of it indeed. But also the International Labour Organization, with the norms and the right of decent work with the care sector, is definitely part of the labor standards. But also the International Telecommunications Union, that they work on bringing the infrastructure of that enables us to have internet, for example. And also I will probably stop there. And of course, the World Health Organization, that I am also involved in assistive technology. But we talk about assistive technology, we should never forget also low-tech technology. Not always we need to go to AI and super sophisticated. Most of the people in the world do not have access to glasses. So we really need to take into account, and not only because we need to also care about what happens in the world, about what happens to older people, not only because we have responsibility, and the UK has in large part a lot of responsibility, but also because of the migrants and because of the number of care workers that come from developing countries, and they also need, or they will go back to their countries, and people from here caring for their families in other countries. And the world is one, and we all should care for each other. But I think I will have to stop here.
Yeah, you do. Sorry, Silvia, because I have got a pressing follow-up question. And I would just like to hear, when you go into the UN, you listen to a lot of these conversations or WHO or these other forums, international ones. What do you hear? Do you hear something about AI specifically in long-term care? Are there conversations going on?
Yes, and in fact, WHO has a brief on ageism and on AI and ageism. There is also a committee working on AI and the ethical application of AI. And yes, that conversation is everywhere. And today, I don't know if I may, but because today I got this Universal Declaration on Bioethics, and AI was part of it. And something that caught my attention was the issue of that they put in there we talked a lot here about accountability, the importance of authorship. You know, we know when somebody publishes a document or a book or any new technology, here we don't know who is saying what and who belongs to what. So the producers, the technology providers, they should also take responsibility, but it has to be from an obligation from above. And the issue of property, intellectual property, somebody has to own it. It cannot be just to itself.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And I think I'll come back to, how we might be able to play something of what we've been doing into the UN process somehow in the future.
And just the last thing that today I was checking the translations because I speak a few languages. So I was checking the translation of the draft resolution and I found horrible errors in the Spanish. So I already reported it. And then somebody tells me, oh, you see, everything will be done by AI. We will not need all these translators to make the mistakes. I said,
well, probably the AI will make the mistakes then. Well, thank you, Silvia. I will now move on to Christopher. Christopher, if you want to also give us a few short reflections on what you've seen and what the situation is like you're coming from Bavaria, which is separate to Germany in a way. But yeah, Germany, thank you.
I'll do my very best. Thank you so much for having me here. It's great, and I just learned so much from this morning on. When you asked me to come here and to comment on what I'm going to hear and what the German perspective is, I started writing, and after 10 pages I stopped. So I'm trying to keep it very short, but nevertheless I agree with you that it touches a lot of topics and themes which are connected to lots of things of daily living we do have. What this morning sort of something I will take away from this thing is that the idea of participation is essential, because that very much resonates what we're doing at the Competence Center. We have been doing a few projects lately on trying to include also people with dementia, for example, in co-designing processes. And that is something I can tell you from the bottom of my heart, which is much more complicated than it sounds, because it takes much longer, and consent changes. People say, I want that, but maybe 10 minutes later on, no, it's too much, I don't want to do anything with that. And who are you, by the way? Therefore, also, all what we're discussing here is connected to the idea of consenting and being able to consent, and being able to consent for a period of time. The idea of a process consent is something which is in law, we don't know very good, because people once give consent and then sort of things go on and on and on. But the idea of asking again and again and again is, I think, much more of importance in AI, in social care context, because we touch so many private topics and intimate topics throughout the day. And obviously, AI doesn't forget like humans do. The second thing which comes to my mind, is, which I learned this morning much more, is the idea of trust. People need trust to trust the system. And in Germany, we do have a different system, not so much commission, but more insurance system when it comes to social care. And a lot of care is provided by big providers like the Catholic Church, obviously, or other churches, and huge institutions of the welfare state. People trust them. So they don't know who will come into their home or who will visit them, but has a very, very deep and personal insight into their lives, even sometimes the shadow parts of their lives. And this is closely connected to trust. People accept this because they trust sort of the institution behind these individuals coming and taking care of. This changes. We had an experiment with people. We were asking, so there are two ways you can decide during the night. Usually at 2 a.m. in nursing care facilities, there's a checkup. Are people still alive? Is everything all right? And there are two options. You can either have a person, a human being coming in and saying, are you all right? Hello, Herr Müller. Hello, Mr. Müller. Are you all right? Or a camera just like watching you. And then someone you don't know sitting there and just like checking up, oh, room 22 is still awake and breathing, 23, all right. And what I expected was that people would favor the person coming in, a human interaction. But then people said no, because from my experience, those people change about 4 to 5, 6 weeks' time, because we have such a massive amount of people changing in the social care sector. It doesn't matter, because I don't trust the person coming in, because I don't know him or her anyway. Because once I get to know them, they are gone. So a camera is better, even if I know I don't know anybody who's like taking care of me in this moment. But still, it's the same. And the third topic I would like to touch is the idea that social care is a system under financial stress. In Germany, it is very much currently. The demographics and sort of the global changing world and the reallocation of funds changes topics for which money is there. And I would only hope for what's been said before, that we don't have people losing jobs because we only make the spare people we do have working better. But then at the same time, I had a discussion lately with someone programming an app with an AI tool for rostering care workers, like doing a weekly roster. And they said it's technically not a problem, but you can't do a legal compliant roster because you've got too little people there. So it's not a technical problem, but you've got too little people. It's not an AI problem. We need to solve the human side of the problem. And so that sort of resonates within me. And I think that's also a German perspective, however, also on another level, a global perspective.
Thank you so much, Christopher. Again, also a follow-up question for you. Now, having seen or got to know what we have done here, the process, can you tell me a bit, in Germany, do you currently already have official guidelines that would help care providers use AI in their services in a responsible way? And according, whatever your response will be, do you feel like we can take what we've done here, transfer it into the German context?
I could give a very short answer, no and yes, but also yes and no. Because I think it's complicated. The system is different because in the German system, which is based on an insurance model, it's much more about complying with legal requirements. There is something called the Heimaufsicht. I'm very sorry, I think I can't translate it to English. It's basically someone observing all the nursing homes and taking care that all the legal requirements.
Inspectors.
Yeah, but it's more than inspectors. It's just like a whole system, and that's a very, I would say, very bureaucratic way of addressing the issues. But on the other hand, we had the discussion in the break. Sort of, it ensures that it's clear upfront what's being paid for and what's not being paid for. So what I would suggest, or what my thoughts were on that, I think it's necessary to have that discussion which is taking place right here now, but I think there needs to be another level or another system, because it's much more based on the law and the oversight system, where all these topics need to be influenced and sort of to be placed, that they can have the change in reality much more.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're raising a really important topic here, which, I mean, this care is also a highly regulated sector here in the UK, and we need to also see on how AI and using AI actually fits within that, whether we'll need new regulation or whether we need to adjust something. So there's a lot of work to be done there too. Thank you so much. Samir, I'm now coming to you, to the Canadian perspective.
Absolutely. So I first of all want to say thank you and congratulations to everyone here. You've been on a journey for over a year, thinking really carefully about how do we think about AI in social care. And this is a conversation that we truly haven't had in Canada. We're very similar as countries. I actually came here 24 years ago to do my DPhil looking at integration of health and social care in the UK. And sadly, things haven't really changed on a great deal, which is great for me to come back and say, okay, so we're still in the same place, but at least you're leading a conversation now on something incredibly important and something that we need to think about. I remember, years ago, I was at a meeting with the minister and a conversation around social care, and that was when a phrase was really being used quite a bit about nothing about us without us, right? And the idea that when we think about what AI could represent, and not just AI, but digital technologies and integration in care, in a system similar to Canada, where in Britain 2% of GDP is spent on social care, same in Canada. This is half of what other countries like Denmark or the Netherlands spend. So we have a grossly underfunded system, and when you grossly underfunded a system, you get the results that you pay for. You have people who can't get adequate care. You have an insufficient number of care workers, and it's no surprise why people leave the profession, because they're not being respected, and fundamentally, we're not respecting those who need the care in the first place and their families. So there are fundamental issues, I think, that Christoph represented that we need to fix first. Otherwise, there's that danger, there's that threat that AI and digital technologies, well, why are we implementing them? Are we implementing them because we can't find care workers, so let's create robots? Are we creating, we're trying to create more efficient care, but then are we dehumanizing care? Are we making it less compassionate? I know there was an example, for example, in Denmark, where one of the local authorities was simply saying, we don't have enough care workers to go in and do a weekly vacuum of our clients' homes. Therefore, they bought those robot vacuum cleaners. Very practical thing, that can just run around your place as tripping hazard. That's, as a geriatrician, I'm a bit concerned, but they did this. But then, people neglected the fact that, while Christoph was talking about, I don't know if I want anybody coming in the middle of the night to wake me up and check if I'm alive. But, for a lot of the older people who were receiving this service, it wasn't about the vacuum clean. It was about that social contact, that social connection, and just importance of understanding what care is and how we value care. So when we start thinking about some of the things that we heard about today, there were a number of things that resonated, and a lot of the work that Caroline and I have been doing over the past year has been looking at, what are some of these issues? First of all, just the whole issue of what is the data that is being used for assessment, and that danger about bias, and the idea that, there's a lot of ageist content, within large language models because it reflects what society thinks, and society doesn't think so highly of older people or older people who need care. We saw a big incident with Gemini, Google Gemini, just only in November, where someone in graduate student in Michigan was searching, questions around how to care for older people, and it ended up responding saying, "You're a stain on society. You're a waste of resources. You should just go ahead and die." That's what Google Gemini actually came out and said. And of course, people said, well, oh, that's bad that it issued a death threat. I'm thinking this is so horribly ageist. And they were saying, well, maybe it was a hallucination. Was it a hallucination? Or was it a natural reflection of kind of what our society thinks? And so if this is the basis of these data points, as Silvia was saying, we need to stamp out digital ageism before we can really trust the data and the data that we're building. And we've talked about how we can remove bias. The other big issues I think that were talked about, that really I've been reflecting on a lot over the last little while, is about this idea of privacy and security. And we talked about, the rights of people to not necessarily being monitored all the time. You can say, we'll monitor in the view of safety, we'll keep an eye on you. We can turn the camera on in your bedroom at any time just to see if you're alive. But I don't want the camera on in my bedroom all the time. It's how do we balance that view of privacy and security? And another example, I didn't hear about it today, but something that Carol and I are writing about is just the use of digital surveillance technologies. Air tags, for example. In my practice now as a geriatrician, about 2/3 of my patients are living with a cognitive impairment, most likely dementia, and loved ones, out of love, are tagging them, and not necessarily asking them whether they want to be tagged or not. And this creates huge issues because, as Christoph was saying, people have just because you have dementia, doesn't mean that you cannot actually participate in your care. And, we have this, act in Canada called Healthcare Consent and Capacity. Anytime as a practitioner, as a care provider, that I'm doing something with an individual, I have to check whether they understand what's going on and whether they are capable of consenting to whatever it is I'm going to do, giving them a pill or operating on their leg, whatever it might be. You have to ask that person every time. And I think the challenge is that with these new technologies and things, I was asking one of the care providers or the technology providers, it's like, are we making sure that we're tying all this in, this need to get consent and that, and checking before we use the magic notes and everything? Because we heard about garbage in, garbage out, right? And is that voice being heard, and is it the correct voice? If it's not being done well, then you can imagine there's huge challenges. So how do we make sure that as we're using these new technologies, there's a lot of excitement about them, but then we have to also think about the realities about thinking about consent and capacity, especially when most of the folks who live in care homes, many of the people who are receiving care have cognitive impairments, have other challenges, and we have to really respect those needs and their rights, and how do we actively and appropriately participate them. And finally, when we think about care robots, we heard a little bit about this. I know one of the folks here was saying they're hoping for a Robert, for example, but I look at that with terror, in different settings, not in your setting. You actually gave me faith that there's actually a use for it if you have 168,000 pounds. But I see these robots, that they're trying to use in care homes, and in many Japanese care homes, less than 10% actually bought a robot, and then in most of the cases, the robots ended up in the cupboard because they've created so much caregiver and care provider burden. And imagine my older patient with dementia, half of whom have behavioral and psychological disturbances. And now you have this robot coming up towards you. What are you going to do? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to punch that robot and say, go away. So exactly, it better not. Yes, exactly. So either way, I mean, these are some of the challenges, and I think the key is, I'm glad that we're surfacing them. I'm glad that you've been doing this for over a year and come out with some very powerful statements, from everybody who's involved in this ecosystem. And this is something that we haven't done in Canada, but I think is broadly applicable. So I'm hoping that while you've come together in Oxford to create these, if you will, these Oxford statements, I'm hoping that we can, what I call R&D, not research and development, but rob and duplicate, and basically take this to Canada as well, just so that more people can benefit from the work that you've been leading.
That's great. Well, thank you so much to our panelists. Samir, I just have one follow-up question. So you've come into the Institute for Ethics in AI in September. Also, AI being something, ethics of AI, something that was new to you. And I was wondering, what is something that you have learned, one or two things that you have learned in the past half a year or so that you've been with us as a practicing geriatrician and AI? So what of like one or two highlights that you will take with you when you go back into practice?
Yeah, I think, again, I have tremendous hope. I think AI it can be quite scary, but I think what I've really come to realize are two things. One is, people, there's this huge tension between the idea of innovation with AI, but regulation. And I think a lot of people feel that, get out of our way, don't regulate us because, then you'll stifle innovation. But I think when we're talking about AI in relationship to the work that we do, thinking about the care of vulnerable individuals, we do need safeguards, we do need regulations, and there is a fine balance that I think we can achieve and we should have in place, because right now, if you look at things that are out in the world, social media and that, people are afraid to regulate it or do anything around that. We need to get ahead of this, and I think I've really been thinking very carefully about that balance between regulation and innovation, and I don't think they're disconnected. I think they can go hand in hand, especially when you're thinking about vulnerable people. And I think the other aspect that I'm, again, really intrigued about, again, people have talked about this, is about the issue of liability. And I think, Silvia talked about this too, this idea of this transparency, this explainability. Because again, when you look at AI tools, generative AI tools that can hallucinate, you do need a human in the loop right now to make sure that things are okay. But you also need to have that accountability from technology providers as well. Who produced this? What did they look like? Did they look like the people in this room? Did they? And do they understand? Because otherwise, if mistakes happen, someone needs to be accountable. And I think, as we were hearing before, it shouldn't fall on the backs of the people receiving care or the people providing care. We all have a responsibility, but we, with regulation, we can put those parameters around it that can be helpful.
Thank you. So this is a slightly shorter panel session. So I want to open the floor to questions directly to our three panelists. If you want to engage, on a more sort of global level, if you've got questions there, yes, please.
Thank you. Belinda Mosbauer here. I work choice support. Just a quick question. We've spoken about consent a lot. So just as an example, Christopher, what would have happened if half the people you support had said, well, I consent to the cameras, and the other half said, we don't? What's the process then?
That's a very easy question because it was a hypothetical experiment. We asked people sort of, what would you do? Because technologically it was not possible there. But what we would have done, like we asked sort of the staff, what would you do? And they argued, well, if more people would say, we would like to have the camera, and we will go for that. But then that's one solution for all. And that's the big danger I'm seeing, which relates to what you were saying, sort of how much is opting out possible of AI, of digitalization? Is it a right sort of to stay offline, to not be included in all that data sets and all that automated surveillance systems? I don't have an answer for that right now, but we are discussing that question. And I think it's vital for us to answer that question because that's part of the co-designing what you just mentioned.
Thank you very much. My question is for everybody. My name is Ellssel. I'm a care provider from Scotland. I would ask the question of how do you respond to those who may see the use of generative AI as cheating? Because there's quite a few people that still see that as the case.
It's cheating. Who in the panel wants to come in on that?
Well, could you expand on what you mean by... No. I mean, is it the idea that, I'm a lazy worker because I simply put in some parameters and see what it says?
Yeah, the way I suppose that some people see those who use generative AI to shortcut the requirement for spending hours of personal brain power themselves and using the tools to be able to use that. Some people still see that as a cheat, like a quick step rather than something that takes the real time, those people who have the brains in that sense.
Oh, that sounds like it. Yeah, Christopher.
I think we need to go one step further, then ask what's the sense of something which can be replicated that easy. We had the discussion, I think the three of us had discussion during the break, sort of what will happen if sort of all the documentation is run by AI and then a supervision system run by AI will pick out those sort of AI done reports and saying that we don't believe that. Sort of what's the use of that system? And maybe that helps us to focus on sort of what is essential, what we're doing, and what is non-essential. But maybe that's not an answer to cheating or not.
And I wouldn't look at it necessarily just as cheating. It's just kind of, again, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And if this actually makes you more efficient and releases more time to care, for me as a physician, documentation burden is it's a nightmare, especially, when my notes are 6 or 7 pages long for a new assessment. I mean, if I could have something that could do that well, however, I need to be in the loop to make sure that whatever comes out is accurate. And I also think that the individual patient and their family should have the right to look at that and sign off on it too, because was it just what I heard and my interpretation of what it came up with, or was it also theirs as well? So I think, there are uses, but I think if it can release more time to do the things that AI can't do, like hold somebody's hand, that makes a huge difference.
I agree, and I also think that, I go to the doctor, and sometimes I feel the doctor spends more time looking at the screen than looking at me, right? Because the doctor has to fill in the things or immediately goes to check the symptoms that are in the system. To what extent, really, the technology is responding to the needs, and to what extent the needs are a response of the new technology. I also think that we don't link it to the social justice. There is no enough care workforce. But that's also partly because the workforce, like teachers, are lower and lower in the status. They are paid less. Geriatric nurses are the lowest paid. So there are not many who want to be geriatric nurses because the pay is really not interesting. So everybody wants to be an IT professional and think that they will make money. So really, do we really need a robot at home, or we really need to pay more? It's simply because the robot exists that I will have a robot. Rather, if it didn't exist, we may find other solution that is more human solution if we are ready to pay that. And that's why I brought the ILO, the International Labour Organization, in the mix, because the standards of our work, the standards of our pay, our paycheck are important, and I directly link. And that our work, really, the needs need to generate what the technology that we need, and not the other way around. And I feel that we are really taking by what is developed and not the other way around.
Thank you. I'm going to abuse my power as the chair to ask the last question before we break. And so I'm wondering, the definition that we have proposed on the responsible use of AI in care is heavily based on values, human rights, dignity, well-being, choice and control, and so on. Do you feel that from this point of view, it's something that we can translate internationally? Or do you feel that good quality care, fundamental values of care, is something that is quite different in different contexts and that we would have to, expand on them, for example?
I think from a Canadian perspective, I loved kind of the statement that came out, because I think if someone doesn't actually use those words like human rights, about dignity and that, I don't hear that in the broad conversation when ChatGPT or other things are out there. So I think it's really, again, it's the idea that this is a group, that has come together and said these things are fundamental to using AI in the care of myself, the care of my loved ones, the care of each other. And so I think that's important, because if it's not stated so explicitly, I think there's a risk that we can gloss over those things very easily in the efficiency of providing care.
I believe that values are universal, and that dignity and human rights are universal. I don't believe when they tell me in our culture we respect our elders, because I know that there is abuse in all cultures, and I know that discrimination is across the board, and that the values should be really universal for all. And yes, it is possible. And the importance of human rights, again, is because the responsibility is on the states, because it is the governments that sign, that they ratify, and they have the ultimate responsibility. And that's why it's so important that policies, and it's not about regulating, it's about setting the standards that has to be from a government perspective. So that is.
Thank you.
I would sign up for what you both said, but I would go one step further. I think talking about human rights is the first step, but doing HI in social care based on a human rights approach on a daily basis, reflecting on the ideas of human individualized rights, is something that needs to be supported on very many levels, not only states, also on the individual level, on anybody's, anybody on the various levels. And that's something sort of, I think we're on the first step, but I think it's a step in the right direction.
While respecting as well the language. I mean, we talked about bias. It's not just male, white, young. It's also in English. Yeah. So when we talk about AI, we really need to understand the difference in the language and cultures that really need to be taken into account when developing algorithms.
So we agree our definition is an international definition, I would say. Okay, please join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you so much for giving us an international perspective.